Week 9 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few kickers I have as sleeper options this week. The first guy, Suzanne Gonzales of the Carolina Panthers. So Zane Gonzalez, he's been pretty solid so far this year in his first season in Carolina. After last year, he was with the Arizona Cardinals. And the last 3 weeks here for Gonzalez, Week 6 versus Minnesota, 8 points. Week 7 at the Giants, 4 fantasy points. And Week 8 at the Atlanta Falcons, 15 fantasy points. And right here in Week 9, I think he's got a pretty good matchup here versus the New England Patriots. In this ball game, I could see a lot of field goals from both sides and both teams, obviously. But I could see this being a low-scoring type of game. So Zane Gonzalez, he's been pretty accurate. We know he's got a pretty good boot. And he's definitely a kicker that should be on the radar this week as a sleeper option. And he's available in 97% of fantasy leagues, while he scored double-digit fantasy points the last 2 out of 4 ball games. The next kicker is Brian Johnson of the New Orleans Saints. So Brian Johnson, he's been the kicker now for the Saints. Starting in Week 7 at Seattle, he had 6 fantasy points. And Week 8 versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 8 fantasy points. So this week here versus the Atlanta Falcons, I could see a few opportunities once again for Brian Johnson and the Saint offense to score some points and put points on the board. This Atlanta defense isn't great. New Orleans is at home. I know Jameis Winston is out for the season, but no matter if Trevor Siemian or Taysom Hill's going to be the starter in this ball game at quarterback, I still think the Saints can move the ball on Atlanta, and there'll be a few drives where they're going to have to settle for field goals. So Johnson right now is available in 98% of fantasy leagues, and I think he could have a good week this week as a sleeper option. And the final kicker I have as a sleeper option this week's Jake Elliott of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Jake Elliott here, he's been pretty decent this season at the kicking position. Not putting up huge numbers, but still pretty steady here. And the last 2 weeks for Elliott, Week 7 at the Vegas Raiders, 2 extra points for 2 fantasy points. But Week 8 at Detroit, a huge fantasy day, 15 fantasy points. So right here in Week 9 versus the Los Angeles Chargers, the Chargers give up the 5th most fantasy points to kickers. And I think Jake Elliott could have a good ball game in this one here, where he could get anywhere from 7 to 8 fantasy points. And right now, he's available in 92% of fantasy leagues. And the Eagles know they got to get a lot of points on the board if they want to keep up with this Charger offense. So that's this year I have in Week 9 of the fantasy football season.